Well, welcome everyone. Representative John Ray Clemens, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. That was week 2. I don't know what to say. Here we are, a couple of weeks into the legislative session, and we have still yet to focus on or discuss the issues that actually matter to every Tennessee family. We were elected to come up here and serve to improve the quality of life of those we have the honor of representing. We have yet to really have an earnest discussion about improving the transportation infrastructure of this state, expanding access to health care, improving our public schools. None of this stuff seems to be on the front of the agenda of the single party, running this state across the aisle. And that's very unsettling to us. But today we're going to discuss a response to several issues that are moving forward, that aren't at the front of any family's mind or not a subject of any discussion at any dinner table across the state of Tennessee. And in fact, they're more about fighting a culture war and targeting Nashville families and others. So we'll start with Chairwoman London Lamar discussing the abortion issues.
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming. This week has been a very interesting week 2 for us, and we started off this week with the governor's state of the state addressing many of his budget priorities for families. One of the things I was most interested in was his Tennessee Strong Families piece, where he was investing $190.3 million into perinatal, prenatal, and other family services here. Now, with the current state of women with abortion being banned, of course, I'm excited there's a significant amount of investment into healthcare services and medical services, with the $90 million of that going to direct and 10 care patients. But that $100 million that's been allocated to crisis pregnancy centers was very much so a concern of mine. Now, what we all hear are the facts. Crisis pregnancy centers are run by non-medical, non-healthcare, and volunteer, non-trained counselors to make you okay with the fact that you have to have a baby. They are counseling services that offer no healthcare or medical services. Now, with $100 million of that $190 million being offered to those centers, I find that problematic. When we could be using that $100 million for direct medical services and investing that money into the other services he put with the $90 million. More so, when I took a look at the budget book on page B19, it is listed as a criminal justice grant program. Now, I'm not sure why a program that is being marketed as something for mothers and families as offering counseling services is now listed under criminal justice grant program. I am very concerned about that for several reasons. And when I was in the Senate Finance Committee today, I asked the commissioner a very distinct question. Who has oversight on this criminal justice program? And will these women have HIPAA coverage since this program is being listed under a criminal justice program? He could not answer that question. So my concern is, will these women be subject to their information being collected publicly, or be given to law enforcement if a woman comes into one of these clinics looking to find abortion services, either in this state or outside this state? Now, that is a huge violation to me of women's right to privacy, and it's misleading to invest so much money into clinics that offer no healthcare services. Now, there are about 60 crisis pregnancy centers across the state with average budgets between $1 and $1.5 million. So if he was going to allocate money to them, they will only need about $60 million. But we're allocating an additional $40 million on top of what the average budget of all the crisis pregnancy centers are in this state. I find that very problematic. And what I hope is the governor's office reconsiders the money that they are allocating to crisis pregnancy centers and give those to direct service providers like doctors, 10 care, and other programs are going to help mothers have healthy and effective pregnancies, given the new state of women's health care. So that is something I wanted to bring to your attention. I hope that we can get some answers around why this particular fund is coming from a criminal justice grant program that is listed in the budget.
Yeah, at this time, I'd ask Representative and Leader Harold Love to address the Metro Council issue.
Good afternoon. As you all know, in the House Local Government Committee, the bill to cap city council numbers at 20 passed out of committee. Of course, it's of great concern to many of us here in Nashville because with the size of our Metro Council, we are concerned about the reduction in size having an effect on the diversity of persons who will be elected. More than that, we are concerned about the fact that it appears to be specifically targeting Nashville because there are only one city, metropolitan city in the state that has more than 20 members in its governing body. There were no metrics given to describe why 20 was the chosen number. Why wasn't it 35? Why wasn't it 37? Why wasn't it 30? There was no information given about that, simply that efficiency was the goal. And when asked about what was efficient, references were made to the fact that there were discussions and there were robust discussions about budgets. That's what we do up here. We discuss the budget with robust questions and answers. We sometimes delay the budget being passed because we want questions answered. We want information given. And that, I think, is a cornerstone of our democracy, to have concerns addressed, to have questions answered, and to find solutions to problems. When you have efficiency, you have opportunities for people to talk about what's important. If you reduce the number of the Metropolitan Council, I think, and my colleagues I can agree, the fact that you will probably produce more inefficiency because you'll then have persons having to adjust to an increase in addition to all the other issues they'll be facing as Metro Council members with an enormous amount of responsibility at that point in time. The city of Nashville will continue to grow, which means that those persons who are capped at 20 may find themselves at some point having more numbers in their district. So I hope that my colleagues would hear us and understand that even from a historical perspective, when they merged and consolidated Nashville and Davidson County, that number grew from 21 to 40 to specifically make sure that there was diversity in the representation. There's no other situation in the state of Tennessee like Nashville when it comes to a consolidated government with the size of the population in Nashville. So I hope that my colleagues understand that this reduction in size, though it applies to anybody per the writing of the legislation, it really only affects Nashville in this application. And I hope that they would realize that this will not produce a more efficient government, but may in fact produce more inefficiency because of the backlog of things that our Metro Council members have to deal with after they have their size reduced. Thank you.
Wait, Representative, would you mind saying it just so they have it also that it shouldn't be a local, but I think you're doing such a good job that it shouldn't be a local decision.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. All right. So one thing that's been said time and time again, the number may need to be reduced, but here's the key to it. That decision needs to be left up to the voters of Nashville. When you talk about the importance of local control, when you talk about the fact that people should have their own self-determination and be able to decide for themselves what to do, yes, cities were created by the states, but they were created and given certain powers of their own to determine the size and the composition of their governments. And so to Senator Campbell's point, this has already been decided by the voters of Nashville. And if given the opportunity again, let us decide what is best for our city and our form of government and our constituents. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that, not that I can add much, but I think there is a fair legal question as to whether or not they're dealing with a county or a city in this instance, because as you know, one is constitutionally created as opposed to the other, and so I think they're running into a legal headwind here on this issue from several perspectives, and so we'll continue to look out for that. And to wrap up, I just want to briefly address and request that the leadership on the other side step back and walk away from this idea that was floated this week to cut federal funding for education in the state of Tennessee. Public education is priority one for everyone, and that is the single top priority of every Tennessee family. It can completely has an impact on every facet of our community, and we as Democrats believe in strong public schools. public schools, you would make such an fiscally irresponsible decision that would directly jeopardize the integrity of the entire public school system in the state of Tennessee. Not only from the standpoint of disabled children and underfunded children, low-income children, you really run a risk of violating the state constitution, because then once you have again refused to receive federal funds for which Tennessee taxpayers already paid, you're now going to only allow them to receive a fraction of the dollars they have invested in public education. And when you cut off federal funding and lose that money, not only do you jeopardize those Title I, IDEA, all these federal programs, SNAP, you're then putting the state in a position where it has to fill in that hole. So you're really making Tennessee taxpayers pay twice for the same underfunded public school system in the state of Tennessee. That is completely fiscally irresponsible and jeopardizes the entire future of this state. Not only the future of children and leaders of this state, but the entire local economy of every community of every part of the state of Tennessee. I think I would just request that the leadership across the aisle backtrack and really think through that statement before they pursue that dangerous idea. And of course, the point has to be made that the state has to fill in those holes that are left by the lack of federal funding, because we're constitutionally obligated to fully fund the public school system in the state of Tennessee, which I would argue we fail to do currently. But if we cut off federal funds, we're going to be in an even bigger hole, leaving ourselves the requirement to double dip and make Tennessee taxpayers pick up even more of the tab, when we could be using those very same tax dollars to invest in increasing access to health care, to improving and actually building out a 21st century transportation infrastructure system, actually investing more dollars into our public schools rather than cutting them off and trying to fill in these holes that they're creating themselves. We have a lot of needs in the state of Tennessee that fall within the priorities of the Democratic caucuses that are just simply not being addressed. And in fact, we're going backwards, not forward. And the people of Tennessee deserve a lot better and more forward-thinking policy. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
How serious do you think that proposal is from Speaker Sexton?
I'd hate to speculate as to how serious he is. He may have just been floating an idea, it's kind of just speaking out of turn, but I hope that he's not serious, because it is so fiscally irresponsible and completely jeopardizes a whole host of issues and things across the entire public education landscape of the state that's already underfunded and in jeopardy in so many ways.
Well, he said earlier that he wants to replace that with state money and not take the federal money because the strings attached to it that requires the state to, jump through bureaucratic hoops or whatever, follow certain guidelines. What's your response to that?
Well, I would argue that that would be completely irresponsible, because you're asking for Tennessee taxpayers to pay twice but only receive a fraction of their investment. And when you require the state to fill in more of that funding, think about what those dollars could be used for. We're already underfunding public education in the state of Tennessee. The governor already admitted this week that he didn't even put the full amount of money that he promised with TISA in last year's budget or attribute it for that purpose. We continue to just undermine the public education system statewide. Rural, urban, suburban counties all are suffering from poor leadership out of one-party rule in this state that is hell-bent on completely eliminating public education. And this just goes even further down that road in a more destructive way.
The speaker gave the explanation that the federal government requires too much testing, and this would be an effort to be able to reduce that. And teachers sometimes say that too. Is that a worthy excuse to not follow federal funding?
The irony is thick here. So that's, where do I even start? Look, all of us are concerned about over-testing, but you have to remember this is the same leadership that passed a third grade retention law that placed the entire emphasis on a single standardized test as to whether or not third graders could progress to the fourth grade. So I think we need to be really careful and look at the policies that this state has itself put on teachers, and increased burdens for teachers and students before they start blaming the federal government just because they want to achieve some radical extremist agenda that is yacked about in Congress of eliminating the Department of Education. I think this is a whole ideological game they're playing that's really dangerous once it gets down to the classroom.
It looks, I believe the AG negotiated a deal on the permitless carry to allow 18-year-olds to carry. And now Speaker Sexton was saying that legislation is going to have to be passed to match that, to go along with that deal. So it looks like something's going to be coming up this session, I would imagine.
That would be far more one of the most irresponsible things for this state to do, would give 18-year-olds who are potentially still in high school access to guns without any training, permit, or military experience. Right now, Tennessee has some of the highest violent and gun crime rates in this nation, and it's only going to further exasperate. If you live in my neighborhood where I'm going to sleep every night hearing gunshots all the time, every time I turn on the news there's a teenager or somebody dropping dead from gun violence, then you will understand why this is one of the most irresponsible things that we could do as a state. I'm already pushing legislation to remove Davidson County and Shelby County from the permitless carry because our cities have proven that we cannot handle unrestricted gun access for not even under 21-year-olds. When I think about the logic behind this, no person can drive a deadly vehicle, which is a car, without proving they can take the written test and understand the laws and prove they know how to use it. We are literally taking away that same philosophy when it comes to guns, and they're just allowing anybody to use a deadly weapon in this state without proving that they know how to use it. We make you learn how to use a car, but we won't do the same for guns. We are going to kill children. We cannot say we're a state that's pro-life for children where we're giving children the opportunity to go in stores and buy guns without any type of training or regulation. You can't even purchase alcohol until you're 21 years old. So what I ask is that the state act responsibly and reasonably and think about the impact that these laws are having on our communities, especially urban communities like ours who have experienced decades and decades of disinvestment and has contributed to violent crime in our cities, and we're only going to see more children dropping dead in these streets because we want to give 18-year-olds guns. It is absolutely ridiculous, it's irresponsible, and it's inconsiderate.
Yeah, I would just add, in direct addition to the threat of physical violence that will result from that type of policy, there's a whole legal issue here. And the reason that issue has gotten to this point that they feel like they can just go ahead and rubber stamp that issue is because our Tennessee Attorney General continues to make political decisions rather than legal decisions. And that stems from a lawsuit filed by a radical California special interest organization suing the state of Tennessee. Now, the Tennessee Attorney General, like any lawyer, has a duty to zealously represent and defend his client. General Slattery was doing just that. Well, General Scarametti came in and immediately waved the white flag and entered into an agreed order on a fairly debated question of law. That raises a whole host of issues when an Attorney General unilaterally comes in and I would argue breaches his duty to his client, waves the white flag, and allows them to change state law from the judiciary branch. You know, and I don't want to accuse them of anything, but think about how this could play out. If you had an Attorney General that wanted to go around and encourage people to sue the state on several issues of a legal nature that it may or may not agree with, and then just say, bring the lawsuit, and we'll just roll over and enter an agreed order, and we'll change the law from over here. And then you're going to have this supermajority codify it soon thereafter. That is a dangerous game that raises a lot of separation of powers issues that could play out in a very harmful manner across the board, and again, carry out an extreme agenda that the people of Tennessee do not support. And in this case, it's coming from an out-of-state third party. Just by filing a lawsuit, they changed state law, and the Attorney General didn't even put up a fight. That is very, very alarming, and it should scare everyone in the state of Tennessee who expects the Tennessee Attorney General to do his duty and zealously represent the state of Tennessee, whether he politically agrees with it or not. That's his duty as an attorney.
I just want to throw in, every time we talk about this issue, we should also mention that, that law,
Thank you.
sorry. Every time we talk about this issue about guns in Tennessee, we also need to make it clear to everybody that law enforcement has stated emphatically that they are opposed to this. You know, this is when kids are developing their frontal lobes, their judgment, and to be issuing kids guns when we already have these horrible crime rates and guns being stolen and gun violence in our state is indefensible.
But 18-year-olds, the argument in contrast is that they are allowed to join the military, they're considered adults.
When we're making it easier to get a gun than it is to vote, we've got a problem.
Actually, they gonna let 18-year-olds bring them guns to high school and see if that's gonna be okay.
Yeah, and I just find it highly hypocritical that today the Senate passed a bill to allow, in the name of minors, in the name of protecting kids, that we would now allow 18-year-olds to bring guns to public places. These domestic terrorist groups are showing up in front of drag show performances, and we're giving them license to exert violence on people because we're making it so easy to just carry guns. We're creating the conditions for people to be unsafe in this state, and it's criminal and irresponsible of our state to do that. Can I follow up just to ask about the underpinnings again of what Speaker Sexton is talking about with the federal education funds? We rejected Medicaid expansion funds, we rejected HIV funds, and now we're looking at maybe rejecting federal funds for education. It feels like we're seceding from the union here.
No,
Pretty much.
I just think so. It's a really, this is again, it's like I said, this is a dangerous path down which we're heading. And it's a decision that isn't supported by a majority of Tennesseans. And you're talking about funds that would directly benefit, in HIV's case, directly benefit Tennesseans in public health. You're talking about education funds that would directly benefit our children. You're talking about, Medicaid expansion dollars that would benefit hundreds of thousands of Tennesseans, giving them access to quality, affordable health care. At some point, you just have to step back and say, what are we really doing here? What is the ultimate aim? Is it to kill people? Is it to have the least educated population in the country? Senator Oliver said best, it's criminal. It is almost criminal what is being proposed in a lot of these ways, and it's fiscally irresponsible. For people who tout themselves on being fiscally conservative, these are fiscally irresponsible decisions that are being made by people who are unsupported by a majority of Tennesseans. This is an extremist agenda that cannot control the decisions of this body.
That's a really prescient statement. I agree with you completely. We act surprised, or we don't act surprised, we are surprised when each one of these supposedly crazy things comes up, and it seems like you're independent of one another, but this is all part of a bigger plan, and really it's about power, it's about greed, and it's something that we're seeing nationally going on, and it all falls under the umbrella of the Council for National Policy and an agenda to shift dramatically the power and the control away from democracy. And that is so important for us to realize. It sounds alarming, but when you really start to look at what's going on, you realize that indeed is what's going on, and Tennessee's ground zero.
If I could add about the education funding, here's a question I would ask. If specifically in TISA we had extra funding and extra categories for persons in poverty and concentrated poverty, how then do we reconcile Title I funding from the federal government that specifically is supposed to help students from disadvantaged low-income areas? How does that affect our TISA funding? Because if we're going to your point, cut the federal funding coming down, how do we then double up for those students who would then generate those extra dollars that they're supposed to generate in TISA? So I think there needs to be some consideration about, and really consider how TISA is going to be affected and how these calculations about funding will be affected if you remove Title I funding and these kids are left out there with no extra funding to help them get to the levels they're supposed to be at.
Anybody else?
Nothing? No matter?